From the keyboard to the boardroom, this is the Business of Esports podcast.
The fastest growing entertainment phenomenon of this generation.
I, Prophet of Esports, joined today by my friend and co-host William Collis.
Yeah, we got the book of esports out. It's a big deal.
So everyone knows me as the Prophet and William as the Professor.
They may call me the Prophet, but in my life outside of the business of esports, I have worked on the investment side of the table for the better part of the last 2 decades. The single fastest growing area of gaming and esports is gambling. It's booming right now. You don't need to be a prophet like me to see that. However, as an investor, I've stayed away from gambling and betting companies because of the reputational risk and often shady nature of the companies involved. This was true until now. I've recently bought stock in a new public company called Esports Entertainment Group, or EEG, which is focused on esports and gambling. The big difference that changed my mind is that EEG is a public company, NASDAQ listed, and fully regulated, focused on esports betting. The regulatory and audit requirements of a public company are key in my mind to provide the needed transparency for players, bettors, and investors. I had an opportunity to host the CEO of EEG on this podcast a couple of months ago, and I was very impressed by his vision for the company. We've stayed in touch, and I'm delighted to announce that they've accepted to become a sponsor of the podcast. If you're a family office, institutional investor, or investor of any kind, really, Esports Entertainment Group, ticker symbol GAMBLE, GMBL, might be one of the best ways to get exposure to the esports betting space and gaming in general. Make sure to check them out at esportsentertainmentgroup.com. Having said that, I need to make sure to state that this is only my opinion. I'm not an investment advisor or selling stock in the company. Please make sure you do your own research and seek advice from a licensed professional if you're looking to invest in the field. From the keyboard to the boardroom, this is the Business of Esports podcast. I am Paul Dewalibi. I'm joined by my friend and co-host, William Collis. For those of you who are new to the podcast, welcome to the official podcast of esports. What we do here is we cover the most pressing gaming and esports topics and news of the week, but we look at all of it through a business and C-suite lens. We dissect, we analyze the business implications of everything happening in this industry. For our regular listeners, thank you guys for tuning in every week. Thank you for all the 5-star ratings and reviews. Thank you for all the love you give. Thank you for telling your friends about the podcast. If you haven't already, guys, tell your friends about the podcast. Go leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. We really appreciate it. And by the way, if you haven't already, go buy William's book, The Book of Esports, on Amazon. It's selling
really
like crazy. You don't want to be left out. You don't want to be the one guy who hasn't read it. This is required reading for anyone in the industry, in my opinion. And so if you haven't bought it, go buy it, The Book of Esports on Amazon. And if you have already bought it, go leave a 5-star review. Tell William how much you love the book. I know, William, you appreciate it, right? I mean,
I actually really do. Seriously, like, it's the nicest thing is getting the reviews, and it really does help others continue to discover the work. So please, if you went through the effort to buy it and read it, the 5 stars make all the difference. I really mean that.
Even if I would just say we know there are thousands of people who bought the book who just have not left a review yet. So if you're one of those people, make sure you go do that. Do it right now. You can pause the podcast. This is the only time I will allow
that's true.
it.
We'll still be here. The magic of digital is we'll stay.
We're not going anywhere. So go and do it. William, how's it going? How was your week?
Busy week as always, Paul. Incredibly busy week. But, this is one of my favorite times of the week, sitting down with you, talking about the news. We got some good stories this week, some good stories.
Lots of news this week.
Yeah, lots of news, lots of cool stuff. Yeah, I mean, and the only downside is I just keep losing at all the video games I play right now. Like,
Well,
the problem.
I mean, you did send me this article about Heroes of the Storm speed running.
That's true. That's true. I did send you that.
will
I
just
might try to go
say,
for the world record.
I sort of think this is an April Fool's joke because it was published on April 1st. This is an April Fool's joke, right? There's no Heroes speed running.
I don't think it is. I believe it's a race to like you do something like you go single player and you try to like race to get the enemy keep down as quick or Nexus down as quickly as possible. Like I don't know, it's the beauty, but it really proves to me like people say like, oh, you can't speed run that, and like the speedrunning community loves to prove that wrong, and I think like this is a great example of that. Like, oh, it definitely anything can have a speed run if you try hard enough. Like
I am still going with April Fool's joke.
All right. I
may be
believing.
crushing your Heroes speedrunning dreams here
because it seemed like very achievable records. I'm pretty sure it wasn't, Paul. I'm pretty sure you could do it.
Okay, well then let's set a record and then we can talk about it on the podcast.
All right, I'll come back when I get all my gold splits, and I'm like,
I will say the business of esports had a world first this week. Is my little bit of news, which was, we heard this announcement about, it was some Call of Duty pro that was going to be minting what he was saying was the world's first esports NFT. And when I saw this article, I was like, well, we need to beat him to the punch. Business of esports should be the one minting the world's first NFT, esports NFT. And we did. We didn't know like pre-announcement. We just did it. We hit that world's first esports NFT. I will say you guys can go on businessofesports.shop in addition to like all the cool apparel and socks and things like that. You can also buy the world's first esports NFT. It's a lot of fun. It's 3 of my facial expressions. Once in a lifetime opportunity. These expressions will never happen again. And here's your chance to own them.
NFT stands for now fast totally. So you really absolutely have to go and do it right away.
And we priced it, the way we priced it was just, we looked at sort of other comparables in the market. We looked at The Weeknd had just sort of dropped his latest NFT and he was charging like over $2 million for it, which we felt was unreasonable.
Yeah, well, you probably unreasonably low, right? You're probably using that as sort of your worst case, right?
Yes. And so we set ours at a much more reasonable 470 Ethereum, which at the current time is just under $1 million. But again, you will own the world's first esports NFT officially, and just business of esports history here. Like there's no other way of saying it. And so I would be jumping on that. Anyone listening, with $1 million burning a hole in your pocket, this is where you want to invest it more than anywhere else. William, I don't know. Is that I hate to be, I hate to pitch my own stuff on the podcast.
Do you want me to pitch it for you? Because history doesn't need a salesman, Paul. History just is. This is a moment. Yep. This is like go outside, open the door, the sun is shining. Paul Dawalibi, triple expression NFT. Like,
I couldn't have said it any better. I mean, this is how I'm thinking about it.
I just like the fact, more and more as the business of esports kind of gets, continues to get bigger and, has all these, like, I love that, like, we go and do these silly things still. Like, it's just so fun that, like, we have and it's, like, so good of you to, like, jump on it. You're like, nope, I'm minting my NFT.
So, yeah, by the way, now this guy can't call his the world's first.
Oh man! But we actually have a lot of news stories this week, so we have to get into them.
It's a good segue into the first story, right? Which is
that's right. That's why we did it. We prepared this podcast. We prepare it. So
and there's definitely business discussion to be had here, even though this story was on TMZ. And so the headline here was esports legend Tfue launching custom NFT collection. He basically, the 23-year-old esports, everyone knows him as an esports athlete and streamer. He's going to launch this digital collection, these NFTs that feature animated videos of him sort of in Fortnite or Minecraft style settings, basically. So they're little animations of him doing stuff in gaming. And basically, he looked at what was going on in the traditional sports world with NFTs. And basically he says, I want to follow suit here with esports. I mean, William, we know for a fact this is not as good as owning the business of esports, world's first esports NFT. By the way, we
Strongly,
beat Tfue to the punch, just to be clear.
Yep.
But how do you feel about this trend overall of NFTs sort of making their way into gaming?
Well, in some sense, like, I'm glad, because gaming is sort of the more natural home for NFTs, right? Because we're already so comfortable with digital assets and digital items, and like we don't struggle with this idea that a digital 0 or 1 can have value, right? Like, anyone who's ever bought a loot box or like, purchased DLC, or like, we get that, like, there's this, we get that there's that it's not a problem for, zeros and ones to have some inherent and significant inherent economic value. At the same time, this idea of scarcity is it's not unknown to gaming, but it's relatively newer, right? Like, most things that you purchase in games, and this is not always true. I can think of plenty of games that do have scarcity features in them, but most games where you're purchasing, it's an open market transaction, right? It's essentially, I think you might even describe it. I think the analogy in economics is you're sort of effectively in perfect competition. I mean, it's not quite that, but there's essentially infinite supply of the thing, right? The only it's a little different because the price is fixed, it's set because it's a single vendor market. But the idea being that, anyone who wants to buy the next champion in league or the golden skin, or like, the exclusivity we get tends to be timed, right? Like, you can only get it around this event. You can only have it in this, patch update, right? So it's interesting to see sort of true quantity scarcity coming into esports in a substantial way. At the same time, you have to balance that by, like, and I'm curious for your thoughts, Paul, like, what is going on in the NFT market overall? Because you can't separate sort of the fit with the esports and sort of the digital nature of ownership to, like, just the crazy explosion in NFTs right now. And they're really, I think, going to be one of the defining legacies of the pandemic at this stage,
Yeah, it does make sense in the gaming context for me, right? In the sense that I do believe there's an application for NFTs in gaming that unquestionably makes sense, and people should probably invest and spend money on, right? And to me, the World of Warcraft example is the perfect one always in my mind when people ask me about NFTs, which is, if Blizzard came out and said, we're going to make one sword of this kind, and it's this amazing sword, right?
I know.
And it has incredible, attributes and powers and the whole bit, right? But we're going to mint it as an NFT. People will buy, the person who buys the NFT, who owns the NFT, is the only person who will be allowed to wield the sword in game. That to me makes sense, right? There's clear ownership. That person can use the object that they've bought. There's some application of it in a game. And I could see a market for that being massive, right? Where you want to be the one guy, or maybe the 3 people who own that specific once in a lifetime
the sword
item.
of 1,000 truths, or whatever the
right.
the analogy is.
And I think those are the applications that make sense. Where it drops off for me, and where I really don't understand this, is like these little animated videos from Tfue. Anyone can watch these animated videos, right? They're literally linked in the TMZ article, right? Like I've watched them now.
Yeah.
And what's weird to me that I think people don't understand is when you're buying these kinds of NFTs, you're not buying the digital good. You don't own that video. What you own is the certificate of authenticity of that video. Right? You own the proof of ownership, the proof of scarcity, essentially.
But then can I push back and ask you a question? Like, so anyone can look at the Mona Lisa. Like, yes. I can call up an image of it right now on my computer and see it. Yes. I can probably even get an ultra high resolution one. I can zoom in really close and look at the paint strokes but still somebody actually owns the Mona Lisa, right? Is that fundamentally different? I'm just kind of curious, like, just playing around with it. It's a bit of a facetious question, but it is
different.
Sort of the same analogy, right? There's one owner, but everyone can consume,
Yeah, the Mona Lisa is a bad example because the owner is not, I believe it's it's like it's the Saudis or like the Emirates or it's like one of these countries that bought it.
It doesn't matter.
Or it doesn't matter.
Any,
there's someone.
well-known painting.
The difference is if you own that painting, I can hang it on my wall, and I'm the only one who can hang it on my wall. With the digital NFT, like with the NFTs of Tfue here, right? What is the unique? Again, all you own is the certificate of authenticity. You own the proof of ownership, the proof that it's one of 6 or one of 10 or whatever. But your ability to use or enjoy that is no different than anyone else, and that's where there's this gap for me.
So that's the question I wonder about. Is partly, I think your argument is you want use value, right? Like in your World of Warcraft example, it's pretty clear that like that has some, like there's some inherent utility independent, like that's just a cool, right? Like there's, but the thing you're talking about is you're sort of raising the question of, is it real scarcity, right? Like, is the scarcity that's being created here true scarcity in that it's actually tied to the asset being offered, or is it a parallel scarcity that's relatively meaningless? You know, it's an interesting point. It's like a really interesting question to ask.
Yeah, and the scarcity point also becomes, I think, less of a factor, right? Because I think right now buying these NBA Top Shops, like people are going to lose their shirts on this, right? Because the scarcity is fake. It's totally fake. It's not real scarcity, right? With something like the WoW sword example, at least there, if they decide to go mint 5 more of them, it doesn't change the fact that you still have something useful, that you still have something that has value. It may have less value, but it still has value because it can be used in game. It can be, right? It's not just, again, my concern comes back to people buying these as just plain collectibles worries me that they don't really understand what they're actually buying, right? In the same way, you don't own my face if you go buy my NFT.
Yeah.
Right? Like you own a snapshot that basically shows you have proof of ownership over this one image. It's tough, right? Look, I encourage people to go buy it, to go buy mine especially, but it's one of these things where I worry a little bit. And like everyone's going to pile in now, right? William, don't you agree that we're going to see
this is any, well, first of all, it's any market, any new market, but yeah, I agree. Like it's gone from kind of NFTs have gone from kind of a thing that you read about occasionally as kind of a ha 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 to like everybody is announcing their own NFT play. And I think it's even telling that Tfue is announcing his in response to Gronkowski's, right? Yeah. Like he's like, oh, this NFL player did it. I want to do one too, Yeah, it's very, it will be interesting because I do think there's merits to the asset class, like significant merits, but I also agree with you. I struggle evaluating it. I really struggle because I'm like, I have no problem believing that like rare items in games can have value. So I always ask myself, well, like, how is that different here? And I think I'm still piecing, is it the same? Is it different? I'm still piecing that apart in my mind, I think.
Yeah, I mean the jury's still out on this whole market. I think my advice though is like, yes, there may be opportunity to make a lot of money right now buying into these kinds of markets early, but there's just also so much risk. As a
except there's no risk with the Paul Doalibi NFT because
it's the world's first esports NFT, so you automatically get scarcity right there. So.
All right, I'm gonna stop joking around here.
Let's talk about EA, William. Let's talk about EA.
Okay, I love it. Let's do it.
And this comes back to, I think, again, I really feel like there needs to be some academic article about your whole theory here, but it's yet more proof around your hypothesis that all great companies end up like Disney. And this is the headline here was, game developer EA produces shows to expand reach as a media business. The article talks about how, I'll just read the first sentence. Everyone in esports is a media business these days, including developers like Electronic Arts. Obviously, they quote Todd Citron, who's the general manager of competitive gaming at EA. He says, "We think of ourselves as a media company, and that means trying to think of the best forms of entertainment that are going to make our titles fun to watch by billions of people." And they go on to talk about stuff they're doing with FIFA, Madden, The Sims, Apex, shows that sort of bridge the gap between competition and just pure entertainment. My question to you, William, is, you know, is this lip service? Is this real? Should EA be focused on just making games? Is this the Disney-fication of all the game developers now?
Well, first of all, and I don't often do this, but I really have to say, like, this is a place where I think I really nailed it in the book of esports, right? Because, one of the huge, theories in the book is the BAMS framework, which explains the evolution of monetization models that, video game developers go through. And the M is for media, basically, media and assets is what it stands for. And like, when I was writing the book, like that was not, like people weren't talking about games companies as media companies. And now all of a sudden it's the rage. But if you sort of look at what's happening, it's a logical evolution for a couple of reasons. One is the games drive. Oh, sorry, I'm a little on the book front. It's the M is microtransactions. I messed up my own book framework. It's for advertising and assets, but it's the same thing. It's the media business model. Anyway, what was I going to say here? So the thing that the thing we're thinking about here is, like, first of all, they can do things in parallel. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's nothing that stops. The beauty of these kind of media businesses is they can overlay other businesses, right? So you can still continue to have a robust games business and now expand into a media portfolio alongside of it. So that's one big example. The second reason why these media businesses are powerful is they have, by nature, media businesses have extremely broad reach. So they're also deeply synergistic with other businesses because they create funnels and feeders in. But, the third thing, particularly for games, is like, it's just there's been eyeballs here that haven't existed historically, right? Like there just wasn't a huge demand to watch games 15 years ago, right? Now there is. So first of all, just like the possibility of expanding this way has come up. So, like to me, from like just even if there wasn't something necessarily special or more privileged about media businesses or things like this, like, it would make sense, I think, to look at as an incremental category of revenue. Right. But there's also a question of what are the games companies themselves producing. Right. And more, the answer is brands. Right. Like more and more, you're not buying Call of Duty because it's a one-off first-person shooter. You're buying it because it's Call of Duty. Right. Like Mario, that means something, So I feel pretty strongly that they already have a lot of the ingredients to be media businesses, right? Like those are already built in and baked into the DNA of how they're monetizing. And in some sense, you could even argue that this play for a broader viewership reach might even be a simplification of their core business model because it's moving from interactive to non-interactive, forms of media, which is, itself maybe, I mean, it's a bold claim, but maybe you could say it's easier to do non-interactive, or at least there's a high overlap in expertise set. So I think there's tons of reasons for publishers to want to do this. It makes great business sense. The question is, do we actually, can they actually do it? And do we as consumers care that they, can they execute it well, right? And, the reality is you're not a media company if you launch a TV show, just like you're not a media company anymore if you have a YouTube channel or, media is really, it's, I guess in more than a, superficial way, right? Like media is really a commitment to monetizing on eyeballs. And I'm not so sure we see that in the announcements that are being discussed right now,
I think there's this trend, if you look at the history of entertainment, that content is always king, right? Like content is king in the end. And you can be anything you want, platforms, distribution, you can play any part of that spectrum in entertainment. In the end, content is always king. It's always the thing. It's the pinnacle of sort of that life cycle. It's what people pay for. It's what generates most of the revenue. And I love that EA is thinking about gaming in a more entertainment friendly kind of way. And I guess the question I have, William, is, do you see this like, what I found weird here, let me try and phrase this question. What I found weird here was the person that they interviewed for this article is the head of competitive gaming and esports at EA, right? They didn't interview some creative director or someone in charge of their media and content business. They interviewed their esports guy. And that to me is like, again, where does esports fit on the spectrum of importance for these big developers? And there are definitely like, The Sims will never be a competitive esport, never, right? So it makes sense to do content and shows around that. FIFA maybe somewhere in the middle, right? Could be a highly competitive esport, but also has such mainstream appeal that entertainment is maybe more the way to go. And then I would have sort of the opposite end of the sim spectrum, which is something like Apex, where you go, this has tons of potential to be a competitive esport at the pinnacle of competitive esports. Like, do we really need like shows around it? Maybe we should be focusing on actually producing Apex Legends tournaments and like actual esports content and not just pure entertainment. And so where they apply this seems to be weird. And I don't know if there's this like blanket approach, like we're just going to take all our IP and make, TV shows around that.
I think it's because today the predominant way games access a media business model is esports, right? Like the way, like fundamentally, like that they're like publishers aren't doing a lot of other content production around. I mean, like maybe film, but there aren't really notable gaming film successes. World of Warcraft movie, what happened? We all just like daily reminder that films should have been so good, But like the way it's worked, I think we should say very successfully in market is through esports. So it makes sense that, the division that's sort of leading the charge, in terms of traction is the division that's taking other properties to market. But I agree with you. There's a fundamental difference between broadcasting an Apex Legends competition and doing a Sims, whatever, right? Like it feels like there's a divergence there. And it candidly feels, but at least I should say, if you think of the verticals within the company as gaming driven verticals, right? It doesn't make it. If you think about it as eyeball consumption, like you don't think it's weird that on ESPN there's sports games and then people talking about sports and then commercials and then maybe, like you don't think it's weird that all those genres mix there because it's all sports related entertainment, right? So again, I think as the business models mature, it will look less weird that The Sims is cluttered next to these other things because it's passive consumed media content. And, you'll hope that like they're air at different times and they have different schedules, just like, Saturday morning cartoons versus the evening news, but they'll feel much more synergistic as an asset group over time, I think.
Yeah, I also think you just can't lump it under the same umbrella, right? The team that's figuring out how do we make Apex Legends the top esport in the world with, the best people playing and the biggest competitions and filling the biggest stadiums, right? Like that group is probably not the right group to figure out, how do we do an Apex Legends series on Netflix that explores some of the lore of the characters, or I don't know, right? Like,
yeah, but that's just sophistication in managing your media models. I mean, like, yeah, there'll be different types of content and it should get specialized, right? Just like, if you watch, I don't know, like just like, I don't know, let's use like, Disney can make movies and TV shows, right? And obviously those are different things. They need to be managed differently, but we don't think it's odd that Disney produces both like The Mandalorian and, Star Wars Episode 7, right? We're like, oh, they're in media. Of course, it's different teams and groups that run these things, but they're taking the property in different directions. They're monetizing the property effectively across multiple fronts. I think you'll come to feel that way, at least again, if the publishers are serious about committing and evolving to this business model, right? Which is it's a very difficult thing to do. Like, and I personally think that the challenges, like look at it this way, like look how long it took free to play to be adopted as a business model. You know what I mean? Like free to play took such a long time. The microtransaction model took such a long time to come into being. Even though I think for a long time in market, it was pretty obvious that it was still the best. And you can still name major games today that are not on a free, like major even esports games. I mean, I think you guys know which ones I'm thinking of, like that are not on free to play business models. And that's crazy. It's absolutely crazy, right? But it shows you the difficulty to move away from entrenched, revenue planning and revenue, revenue monetization schemes. And for that reason alone, I think it'll be difficult for publishers to move pure media here quickly. It's going to be a slow transition. It's going to take place over multiple years, and probably all publishers will not go through the transition. Good example there is, like, even though I think they're the one that maybe should the most, Nintendo seems incredibly reticent to do entertainment content, even though arguably they are probably the best positioned company to do media. So again, the whole industry doesn't have to move, but I do think it's of important direction the industry is going to be going in.
We're going to get to Nintendo in a second. I have one last question for you on this, and I think I know your answer, which is...
Go for it, yeah.
Is this pivot to a media business? Because part of it is like messaging too, right? This article doesn't have that much meat on it. It's more EA, I think, wanting the messaging to be, hey, we're not just a game developer, we're a media business, right? We're Disney.
Yeah.
And that also, that just gets you higher valuations and all that good stuff. Is this game developers who choose this path, is this somewhat, I'll call it laziness, in terms of, hey, making new IP is really hard, creating great new games is really hard. It's a lot easier to just keep mining our existing IP and call ourselves a media business, and everyone gets excited about it. Is it a bit of laziness, or you think this is really the right path for most large game developers?
Well, you're asking somebody who thinks that all great companies eventually become Disney. So
that's why I said I know the answer. But
yeah, like, my answer is obvious. This is not laziness; it's maturation, right? Like, it's being able to get more and more successfully diversified revenue streams from the same underlying group of assets, right? Like, you're already making, Apex Legends, right? You've already put all that time and effort in. You should be monetizing Apex Legends as many ways as possible. Why not a TV show? Why not a sitcom? Why not, a web short series, right? Like, if you think you can do it and there's a return there, you should do it, because, like I said, I mentioned, it's a synergistic asset class. So the more Apex Legends stuff there is to consume, the easier it is to be an Apex Legends fan, right? And the more ways you have to drive purchase and, basically brand loyalty. So, yeah, I think it's a really good thing. And I think it's also a credit to the strength of games as a business and as a market segment, that they've matured enough that they can go through this next evolution, right? Because there's plenty of market segments out there that aren't becoming media companies. And, again, in my extremely, limited theory of, kind of Disney is the ultimate company, right? Which, again, I mean, limited justification for it, but bear with me. It's that, games have gone through a lot of forms to get here, right? Like, they didn't just wake up and become media businesses, not in as much as they are today, right? There's been a history of the market evolving and maturing, and the companies stewarding games along, evolving and maturing to get to this point.
William, let's move on and talk about Nintendo. You alluded to Nintendo.
I literally seeded that because we have a great Nintendo article. So
we do. And the headline here is Nintendo. The headline's amazing. Nintendo made 15% of North America's gaming revenues in 2020. According to this article, gaming generated $43 billion in North America in 2020. Companies like Nintendo were major contributors. This is just in North America, so that's Canada and the US here. But in the article, they put this split. And if you look, Nintendo has $6.8 billion and 15.8% market share, compared to Activision Blizzard, $4.43 billion, 10% market share. This is, again, just North America. EA, $2.44 billion, 5.7% market share. And Take-Two, just under $2 billion with 4.47% market share. Now, the article does say that most of these billions were made from mobile games, and the US has more than 200 million mobile players. Do these numbers shock you at all, William, that Nintendo has such a dominant piece of the North American market from a revenue standpoint?
I was pretty stunned seeing this, right? Particularly because I think the narrative, there was a narrative that took root around Nintendo around the Wii, time, which was, it's the second console company, right? Like, it's like, oh, well, everybody goes and buys an Xbox or a PlayStation, and then Nintendo's differentiation is there when you're ready for your second console. The Wii is the one you buy, right? And like, do you remember this myth that kind of like got started that like that was their positioning in market? They're like the console after your first one. That's us, right? And I think that's why this seems surprising, right? Because to some extent, we still don't associate Nintendo, as the leader in as I'm not saying they're not a hugely successful company, but we don't associate them as I guess a leader in particularly like the hardcore avid gamer space the same way you would a Sony or a Microsoft, or you know what I mean? But the reality is, look, according to these numbers, they're huge, right? They're absolutely huge. And yes, mobile is a part of this significantly, and we can't discount the fact that that is skewing things here. But I think it's also true the fact that like the Nintendo games are accessible, right? Like they're really accessible. Like, and accessibility is a key feature of revenue driving in modern gaming markets. The numbers that successful properties have to do are so big, you have to have a very, very large eligible player base. And let's face it, like, it's a game like Call of Duty, not played by a lot of, 8-year-olds, right? Or like maybe, but maybe it's not the core market, right? Whereas Mario, like everybody likes Mario. The new Mario game, like everyone plays it. 40-year-olds, 10-year-olds, right? Like it's this incredibly broad appeal. And that I think is reflective, reflective of the fact that really what's happening here, and this is sort of the maturation of Nintendo, is they've gone from the myth of the second console company to the gaming for everyone company. Like that's sort of what they are. They're like, if you think of all the game portfolios in market today, Nintendo is the most generally all age applicable portfolio of games. I would argue, right? I don't know if you agree with that. I'm curious.
I do agree. I mean, the numbers, I think, and I'm making some assumptions here, right? They don't say specifically, but this is just North American revenue, and I think they just pulled the total number.
Yeah.
So Nintendo obviously has hardware revenue here that an Activision Blizzard does not. Having said that, it is fascinating to me to see, again, Nintendo do 50% more revenue in North America than Activision Blizzard, because I don't think that's the perception at all, even if you do include the hardware sales in that equation. And, I come back to and I agree with the point you made, William, which is this is just like their portfolio is just so massively accessible, easy to get into. It's cheaper to get into than just about anyone else. I would argue has much fewer of the microtransactions and things like that. I don't know if you draw any conclusions there, right? But I would argue that Nintendo has resisted the free to play model more than just about any other company on the planet.
Probably.
I don't know what conclusion to draw from this other than clearly Nintendo's doing something right. Where they're doing something wrong is probably like on the PR and marketing side, right? Because the word is not out that, hey, we're 50% bigger in North America than Activision Blizzard. And Activision Blizzard has a big mobile business. Yeah. Right? It's not like they don't have a mobile business and this is what's skewing the numbers. They have a huge mobile business. I have nothing really to comment here other than I'm impressed, but I think they're missing the mark on the marketing side. And I think part of me is just really happy that they're bucking the free-to-play trend very clearly. How long that lasts, how long they're able to do that, that's unclear to me.
I don't know if I agree so much on the free-to-play trend point, although it is sort of true that you don't see a lot of microtransactions in Mario games. But I think the point still stands that this is, again, there's a lot of asterisks in these numbers here, but it's very surprising. And I think it's surprising, and I think it makes you think, like, again, listeners to the podcast, about the perceptions we carry about the relative ranking in companies, because what it shows you is that the mind share that some big publishers occupy is not necessarily proportional to the market share. I think this is a good example where that case it really holds, right?
William, before we get to our last story, I just have one quick word from our sponsor, Esports Entertainment Group. For those of you who don't know, they are one of the largest players in the esports betting space. They're the only one that is fully regulated, NASDAQ listed. If you're looking to play in esports at all, if you're looking to make investments in the esports space, this is one of the very best bets you can make. It's one of the safest bets. There's none of the reputational risk with some of the other players in the market. Incredible potential growth in the esports betting space. It's the fastest growing segment of the market. I highly recommend, again, taking a look at Esports Entertainment Group. That's esportsentertainmentgroup.com, ticker symbol GMBL. Having said that, this is not investment advice. I'm not selling any stock. If you are looking to invest in the field, make sure you do your homework, consult with a professional before you invest. William, our last story here. Our last story is Atari.
Let's go. Oh.
And Atari here, this was a press release that came out, and the headline here is Atari announces the creation of two divisions, Atari Gaming and Atari Blockchain, and a change in leadership, which is kind of funny that that's the footnote. But in the context of what we just talked about in NFTs, Atari, one of the most, OG, call it gaming brands ever, maybe the OG gaming brand, splitting the company essentially into two groups. One will operate games and do licensing, and that's Atari Gaming, and Atari Blockchain will operate the Atari token and explore new opportunities in blockchain, NFTs, and online worlds. I will say they probably meant metaverse. They missed an opportunity to throw metaverse in there. What do you make of this move by Atari? I know Atari's probably not the most relevant or, they're not the gaming powerhouse they once were, but it's still an important brand. What do you make of this split?
Well, the really interesting thing is what they say. If you go back to the article, what they say the NFT division is covering.
Yeah. It says
if you
the
go
NFT division is covering Atari token and exploring new opportunities in blockchain, NFTs, and online worlds.
It's the online worlds part that surprises me, right?
Because it's not in gaming?
Yeah, because it's not in gaming. That's exactly right. Because to me, if you think what gamings are, like gaming is like the future of gaming is online worlds, right? Like everywhere else we've talked about, we've belabored the metaverse to death in our podcasts and live streams. And it's always been talked about as the extent like gaming is evolving into these more dynamic and flexible online experiences of which gaming is just a subset, right?
Yep.
It's so weird to me to see online worlds put there. And it makes me feel almost like it's sort of a new innovation division. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the fact that it's dropped in there, right? It's like, oh, what are the things that we should be doing that are innovative? Focus on this. You could be reading too much into it. Are they looking at online worlds that are tied to NFTs or blockchains but I think it's probably mostly a reflection of the fact that there is a games business there, right? It probably is. It has value because Atari is incredibly valuable. Like we talked about ourselves, it's like the OG brand in gaming. But there's probably real challenges in scaling it today, would be my guess, right? Like there's probably just real challenges in terms of what's entrenched in the market, who else is operating. Like it seems unlikely that you're gonna doubling down on Atari as a play is the right way to go. So I think this is, or as a pure games company, so I think this is a nice way of sort of honoring the heritage and giving focus while preserving other opportunities to evolve the brand that are still related to the digital underpinnings of the core company.
That's interesting. So you see it more as not Atari Gaming and Atari Blockchain. You see it as Atari old and Atari new is sort of how you see this split.
Yeah, maybe I'm overly simplifying there, but it's just so weird that Online Worlds is in there. You know what I mean? It's just so weird to me.
But your theory makes sense here, William, in the sense that how big of a business can you grow licensing Pong over and over again? I mean, there's only, yes, they have this huge catalog of old games, right? And I'm sure there are significant licensing revenue around those, but that's definitely not a growth story.
Yeah, and it's probably managed differently. It's probably managed more like a blue chip, right? You know what I mean? Like, okay, we know we're going to do so many, license deals for Pong this year. And, it probably is a very different approach to thinking about, how you use these brands, right? And it also doesn't preclude, activating the brands in these other realms that they're looking at in the innovation. It probably just reflects that the underlying business models that these classic brands or these vintage brands are working on are much more reliable and predictable and lower risk, but potentially also lower scalability, lower reward, right?
Yeah, and we've talked some of their, call it Atari old or Atari gaming initiatives, right? Where there were those Atari branded hotels, if you remember.
Yeah, yeah.
The question is more of a philosophical one, if I can call it that. Is, will Atari see a resurgence because of the sort of the areas they say they're going to be playing in? Like, it's all they're hitting all the hot topics, right? Blockchain, NFT, online world. I mean, the reality again, is this lip service, or do you think Atari will see a comeback, a major comeback? And it's not just licensing Pong or putting their brand on a hotel and hoping for some nostalgia, but Atari coming back in a serious way as a gaming business.
I would hope so, because I just have massive, like the name Atari is really evocative, and probably for you too, Paul, right? It kind of stands for, like, as we said, it's like the origins of gaming. It has a lot of value. And the reality is, when I think of like the most recent games I'm downloading, unfortunately they're not Atari games, right? Like, they're not exactly occupying a major share of the modern gaming market. So I would like for them to find a way to inject that heritage going forward. That being said, it makes me nervous too to see, like, I mean, this is sort of flavor of the month stuff, right? Like NFT, blockchain, right? And then, like, again, online worlds just thrown in there. It's a bit like, I hope there's a grand strategy here. And I think the company has the asset plays to do, like, they have assets that can monetize in these fields very effectively, I think. But yeah, it remains to be seen, because my suspicions, like I said, I think it's Atari. I think you said it very well. It's Atari old and Atari new. And they don't quite know what Atari new should be yet, but they're going to try fishing in a bunch of wells, and hopefully one of them will work, and then Atari new will coalesce in that direction.
It's just, wouldn't you have rather them just come out and say, we're making a new Atari MMO, right? Like, wouldn't that just have been so much cleaner, clearer?
I know. But in a world where Amazon is struggling to launch games, right? Like, Amazon is struggling to launch games. Like, the reality is it's a very tough market today. I think it's sort of, in some sense, it's incredibly mature for a games company to recognize that the games business might not be where they want to be, or at least might not be the only place they want to be investing to have, a lucrative future.
But that's what worries me here, right? Like, I have serious doubts that Atari will ever be a gaming company again, right? Other than licensing the old stuff and making sort of vague promises around areas that they're looking into. This was so up in the clouds that it didn't scream to me, hey, we have a clear vision around what we're doing. Let's put it that way. I don't know if you felt the same way there, but
I think that's well reflected in the comment you said, Atari old, Atari new, that I agree with, right? It's like, the vision, that's the vision. It's keep doing the stuff we did that makes us money reliably, but let's find something else to do too that, is going to give us upside and, better multiple and all that stuff.
William, that wraps up this week's episode of the podcast. I'm just going to remind everyone, make sure you go buy William's book, The Book of Esports, on Amazon. If you bought it already, go leave a review. If you have like $1 million left over after you've bought William's book, make sure you go buy the world's first esports NFT. It's one of one. This is the collectible maybe of the century. I will go out on a limb here. I mean, we're only like 21 years in here, but I will say it probably will go down as the
not too early to call it.
It's not too early, right? As always, guys, the podcast drops every Thursday. Also, join us every week, Wednesday evening, 8:30 p.m. Eastern time for our after show. We tape it live after we do the podcast. It's a lot of fun, and it's much more interactive. You get to ask questions. You get to challenge us. And go follow us everywhere. TikTok, Instagram, Twitter. It's all at Biz Esports, and on YouTube at The Business of Esports. And we will see you guys next week.